welcome to today's video. It's been a hot minute since I did any kind of voiceover, but today I wanted to paint the edges of The Giver of Stars. This was a book that I got for my birthday, and a lot of you have asked how I do it, so I thought that this time I would kind of film my process. So of course the first thing we want to do is take off the book cover, and then I like to cover as much of the book as possible with paper because that way you're less likely to get any paint on the edges. There's a couple spots on the top and bottom that you can kind of see that don't get covered. You could always put an extra piece of paper there, but I don't like sticking washi on the actual cover, so I leave those two little ends and then I just try to be really careful. Now, if you saw how I put those clamps on, I just want to really quickly say, try and get them as close to the edge of where the paper is as possible. I had them in just a little bit too far and my pages weren't quite as clamped in the right spots as I usually have them. Anyway, moving on, this is my, I think they call it a wet palette, I don't know. I put a couple sheets of paper towel and then some wax paper down, and that way my paints don't dry out as fast. I typically mix all my paints as I go, but I always mix my paints from scratch, so I figured I would show you guys how I do that. In case anybody can tell, I don't know if you will be able to or not, but I don't have a primary red or blue, so those two colors mix really poorly together. It's always really muddy and I need to get proper reds and blues, but in the meantime, what I did was use a couple drops of my watercolor paints, and you can mix that into acrylic and it works just fine. I've done it a bunch of times, and if you're in a pinch, it does work. So moving on to starting the book, I am going to apologize in advance because this part is the only part that's not framed properly. But essentially, all you need to know is that you want to kind of go and make sure you get along the edges of where the paper hits the actual cover, but don't do what I did, and I was painting this on kind of a weird angle. Don't do what I did and leave it too thick in that spot. Try to make sure that you kind of wipe the brush down so that you don't have a bunch of paint buildup against where the cover is, or it can tear your page ever so slightly, especially because I didn't quite have the clamps where I normally put them. So just keep that in mind, be really careful, and I'll show you what happened closer to the end. So then I usually take the cover off and I keep it nearby because it kind of gives you a guide. You'll see me, I pick it up here and there to kind of make sure I'm lining up where I'm painting on the paper versus like how it lines up with the book cover. So I'm just going down the edge, and this is kind of just the process of how I paint. I don't really know how to teach you how to paint, but this is my process. This is what I do. I kind of go back and forth. I blend the colors. One key thing is to try and keep the layers that you paint as thin as possible, because the thicker that you paint, the harder the pages are to get apart when you're all done. So by the time I'm done, this little area probably has 4 or 5 coats of paint, but they're all very, very thin. And from start to finish, I tend to keep my brushes fairly damp. That also helps you thin out the paint a little bit. You don't want any big globs because, again, the thicker the paint is, once you go to separate the pages, the more likely they are to tear if you're not really careful. So I'm just following the edge of the cover, and you'll see I'm really excited with how this turned out. It was so awkward to paint on the angle that I was at because I was trying to get the best lighting so that you guys could see it, but it also made it incredibly difficult to see exactly what I was doing because normally my face is like 2 inches away from the book. So I'm surprised that it turned out as well as it did. I love this little flower detailing that I stuck at the bottom. It is on the cover, but I used a couple different colors on the cover, and obviously when I paint the edges, I can't be like have as minute details as the cover has, but I think that I got really close. Make sure that you wash your hands because you don't want to have any paint on there, and make sure that the paint is completely dry before you remove the clamps. And once everything's dry, feel free to take those off, and then I'll show you how I open this up. Normally it's not this difficult, but like I said, I did glob a little bit too much paint along the edge, which you'll see in a minute. But I love how this turned out. I think it's so fun. I love doing this to my books. This is like, it just makes me so happy. So Michael Nip, if you're watching, I apologize that I am using this knife piece without the knife holder. I don't know where the actual X-Acto holder went. So I'm just holding a piece of X-Acto knife in my hand. But anyway, I use a piece of like paper cutter metal there just to get the edge off. Don't use the sharp side, use the dull side, or you'll again cut your pages. But I could not get it apart because I accidentally put too much paint there. So once you get that apart, I'll show you how I start opening up the pages, and then that's pretty much it. You can see where I boo-booed there. I actually mixed up some paint and just covered that so that you can't tell now. I just matched some paint and there we went. So when I go to open up the actual pages, you'll see I actually take the whole book, and I swear this doesn't wreck it, and I bend it to one side and then I bend it to the other, and that just kind of releases some of the pages. I give a lot of little bends. It looks really bad, but I swear the book looks fine when you're done. Just be really careful, go slow. And then I always kind of fan the corners. I fan the bottom corners, I fan the top, and I do this as I go through just because it helps to separate and make little pockets so you can take the pages apart easier. And then I go through, and I know this is monotonous, but I go through page by page. And what you want to do is be really careful and just open it kind of like when you're opening a letter. Slip your finger in and then just slide your hand up the page. Be really careful, as I said, because it is possible to tear pages. I've painted maybe 8 books now, and I've only torn like maybe 2 pages ever, but it can happen if you're not careful, and sometimes I get too fast. Normally I like to do this while I'm watching like The Office or something. It's kind of like a mindless thing. You can just go through page for page. You could wait until you read it, but I like to do this as soon as I'm done, and that way when I eventually pick it up, it is hassle-free reading time. So I just go through, and I literally go through the entire book. And then you're all done, and it looks like this, and it's all beautiful. And like I said, I fixed those couple of spots off camera after I was done filming, where I accidentally tore a little bit of the end pages. I slip it back in and check it alongside the cover. This actually lined up really well, so I'm excited with how this one turned out. I know that a lot of you guys were really curious to see how I did it, and that's my process. That's how I do it. It usually takes me about an hour or so. Took me a little longer because I was filming and trying to make sure that I had good lighting and stuff, but I am really excited with how this turned out, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Anyway, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this video. Let me know what you think of the painted edges. Would you ever try it? Is it way too scary? All that good stuff. And while you're down there, if you haven't subscribed already, please do, and hit the bell so you don't miss future notifications. I do upload most Mondays and Thursdays, and I will talk to you guys all soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!